Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we're going to talk about ways to ease the way to S/4HANA with efficient role design. We'll do some introductions. We'll talk about role designs and HANA in general, then get into some methods we can use to make that easier. I'll then show you a tool of ours called Authorization Architect, which takes these techniques that we mentioned in the previous bullet and it puts them to use, and it'll give you an example of how you can do that. And finally, look at some of the other automated access controls that Pathlock offers. My name is Alan Cutting. I've been in SAP security, GRC, and audit support for around 25 years. Most of that time as an integrator. I started with one company and got spun off to an integrator and worked for a few of the big ones over the years. Done numerous SAP security, GRC, and Pathlock implementations, and I'm certified in information security and as a systems auditor. Pathlock, as most of you probably know, excuse me, was formed a few years ago when some of the leaders in the GRC industry came together, merged together, including Appian, Security Weaver, SAS, CSI, and a couple of others. So we've got a whole palette of offerings now in the application access governance space, continuous controls monitoring, and cybersecurity applications. We've got over 1,300 customers worldwide, ranging from some of the biggest SAP installations in the world to much smaller, mid-size, and small operations. We've got a team of auditors, certified auditors, as well as GRC specialists, and what I think are some truly gifted programmers working for us. Today, in the access governance lifecycle, we're going to be starting down here, or we're going to be covering role design, and it's basically where the life cycle starts. Yeah, I was going to say design, but yeah, design and building the roles. And later on, we'll talk about some of the other areas where Pathlock can help you out. So on role designs, why do we periodically need to revise them? One reason would be segregation of duties, SOD risk in the current roles. The roles may be structured in such a way that it's hard to get rid of the SODs. Another would be business changes, organization changes, which happen, continuously through a business, but also for mergers and acquisitions and spinoffs. I've seen a lot of that in the last few years and the work I've done. It may be that the role structure has gotten difficult to understand. Roles may be written in code that documentation has not been kept up, and the people who wrote it are long since gone. And it can be very difficult for new people to come in and understand just how to find the right role for a given situation. There may be a lot of duplication between roles, which makes it harder to look up the correct role to add to someone. You might have a lot of unused transactions, or there've been transaction changes over the years that have been put in old transactions and not been taken out, and these can have impacts. And finally, license optimization. If you simplify your roles and have only the needed transactions in them, it may save you some money in licensing cost. S/4HANA offers its own challenges when you're moving to them. SAP's re-engineered its solution for business processes. They call it simplification. And their goal, I think, is to reduce the need for custom programs, bring it more all in-house and native SAP. But it's got a huge impact on security. A lot of transactions disappear. They're replaced by new transactions. They just don't work anymore, or they're replaced by Fiori tiles. So it's a major upgrade, and you really should be testing most all of your commonly used transactions. There's also, I've seen in recent years, a push for rapid migrations. I can remember working on initial implementations that took, months or years, and now integrators are, offering to get you onto S/4HANA in just a number of months. And when they say that, I think they're really looking at the platform. They can get you up and running on the platform, but it's not a total redesign. And I don't think they ask the security guys about it when they make those promises, but it is what it is. So what are some of the ways that we can facilitate the road to S/4HANA with role design? One would be to base your roles on just the transactions that people actually use in their jobs. And we'll talk about this more in a bit, but probably most people only use maybe 1/3 of the transactions in their jobs. So if you could reduce that, um, it would save you a lot of time in your role design. It would remove SOD risk. And most importantly, probably, it would reduce your testing time, because if you don't have a lot of extra transactions that have to be tested, it saves an enormous amount of time. And testing, particularly if you're trying to test everything that's going to be in your HANA implementation, you've got to build in months of testing in there, basically. Another reason would be to reduce the analysis time of finding out just what transactions need to be changed for S/4HANA. A third would be if you could have a tool that could automate at least some of the building of ABAP and Fiori roles. Fiori roles are new for some companies, and there's a bunch of the lookups in there and the research in there that could be semi-automated and make it a lot more approachable to do that. Use a tool to reduce the testing time while improving results. As I said, testing time is months built into the plan. If the project runs behind, when they're looking for places to reduce time, they may cut back on testing time, but then you pay for it at go live. So if you could find a better way of testing, that would be a huge improvement. And finally, if you could use workflow for approvals rather than playing tag with emails, this would help you keep track of approvals and facilitate the process as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk more about those 4 methods, but I'm going to show you how one of our tools puts those methods to use and ties them all together. So that tool is called Pathlock Authorization Architect, and it's a product to design and build SAP roles. It's designed to greatly reduce the length of role redesign projects, and it builds roles that are built on least privilege. The roles will be reviewed for SODs, separation of duties issues, prior to actually creating them. So you'll model the role first, but it won't actually be built in SAP until you've run the SODs on it. It includes a Fiori role builder. It's got a really nifty stress-free testing operation, and it also lowers your risk during go live. The risk being that you get into production and some of your key functionality just doesn't work. And so in the opening days, you have to go through some fire drills to get people the access they need. I can remember one project maybe 20 years ago, and I was helping out on an implementation, but another integrator was running it, luckily. But on the first day, they tried to run payroll and they couldn't run payroll. And you just think, how could that happen? But it did, and we want to try to avoid things like that. Okay, so the first method we discussed was basing roles on transactions that people actually use in their jobs. So Authorization Architect, which we call AA, just to eliminate the tongue twister, it uses our transaction archive tool, which it comes with a runtime license. So it retrieves transaction usage data of what people have been using in production, and it copies it off from SAP and stores it permanently. It's got a lot of uses in its own right, TA does, but for Authorization Architect, you'll look at that transaction data for each person that's associated with a new position that you're going to create. So for example, if you're creating a new warehouse receiver role, you would attach some current users to it that are currently doing that job. And you may have many of them, but you probably, if you might have 5 or 6 that if you have them covered, you feel comfortable that you've got that job covered. You can attach them, and then when you go to start getting a role proposal, the tool will bring up a screen that will show you the transactions that have been executed, the amount of interactions, so which are being used a whole lot, which are not being used much at all, and the percentage of the users that you attach that are using it. So is it 1 out of 5, or is it 8 out of 10 that are actually using the transactions? It'll help you decide what should be kept in the role, or what maybe you should think about putting in a different role, or maybe putting it into emergency access if it's not used very often, and get to it that way. You're still in control of what goes in the role and what doesn't. And so this eliminates a lot of manual consolidation and reviews that you might do when you're trying to create a role. You might model on a current role, but you're trying to improve them. And if you ask the business, what do you need? They tend to tell you all of them in a given area. If you show them a list, all of these transactions look interesting, but that's how you got there in the first place. So we're trying to find out what they just really need. Another area that we can look at is reducing the time on researching what's changed in S/4HANA. So SAP in any new release adds and replaces transactions. Usually it's pretty addressable in common releases, but in S/4HANA there's a huge reduction or change in transactions. SAP documents this in what they call a simplification guide, and it's over 1,000 pages long. So you've got to go in and look up by area, maybe materials management, and look up what transactions have changed. And then later on, when you're deciding what to put into roles, you've got to see if any of your transactions are on the hit list. And it's overwhelming when you first start off doing it. We have a tool in AA which during configuration, you tell the tool which release you're on and which release you're moving to. And then when you start getting your role proposal, it will tell you, let's say if you're in ECC 6 right now, okay, you've been using XD01, but you're moving to HANA, and it's going to suggest, hey, you really ought to use the BP transaction. And so then you can decide, do I add BP? Do I replace XD01? Or do I just ignore the advice and just leave XD01? You're still totally in control. So this is a big time saver for your security team. A third method would be using a tool for building the ABAP roles, for building the roles in general, for building ABAP roles. As I said, AA, after you've got the desired transactions in it, it will propose a role for you. It actually, before it actually creates a role, it creates a role proposal, which you can review. The proposal looks just like PFCG, and the security person can go through and review the security objects and values that are in the role. If he thinks there's something in there that's slipped in there that's dangerous, that the role proposal is put in there, you can manually inactivate that object or that authorization, as the case may be. So you're still in total control, but it's going to do that work for you. After you've done your initial configuration in the system and you do some master data updates, which will include organizational type data that you'll be putting into the tool, and you'll be putting in for different areas, you'll be putting in the kind of roles you want. It's going to create the role names and the role descriptions. when you begin to work on a role. It's going to give you the long text details, create a structured menu, so it's the transactions that you add are all filed neatly. And for that particular role, it's going to define the org levels automatically. It's going to create composite roles for the position, including maintain and display roles. And if you're creating derived roles, it will create those as well. It's also going to create a Fiori role. If you're utilizing Fiori, it will create a associated Fiori role for that position. So it's going to create the spaces and pages. You can look up the apps that you want to use, by line of business or component or whatever. The app is going to make use of the Fiori page that SAP has on the web. When it creates these roles, it's going to get the spaces and pages and also the services. It's going to look those up for you, and then build the roles and automatically include them in the composite role that it built for the position. A fourth method we discussed was reducing testing time. So AA's got a couple features. One, it automates unit testing, which unit testing is just making sure that a user with this new role will be able to actually successfully open the transaction. Because as soon as he hits execute on the transaction, SAP is going to look for a number of objects. And if those were not pulled in, he or she will not even be able to get into the transaction. This is going to automate that process. So you don't have to have a person going through and testing every single transaction in a role to make sure that they can get in. So time saver there. Now in the user acceptance testing, this is the really nifty part. You can do this in QA or in production, but it's safe to use it in production. And if we do a demo for you and a talk with you in detail, we can show you why we say that. But if you're change management people say you've got to do testing in QA, then by all means do it. It just means that you're not going to have the time savings that you would have had if you had have done it in production. But in using this tool, the users are going to perform their usual work. So an AP clerk is going to process invoices, that's what he normally does. He's going to do his normal operations. And in production, he could do real work. In QA, you'd have to have sample data and all that kind of stuff for him. But he'll do his usual work, and AA is going to check that new role that's assigned to him. And then it's going to first look at the new role that's attached to him and say, does that have the adequate access to do this? And if it doesn't, it's going to let him fall back to his pre-existing condition with access, which presumably he was able to do that operation, that invoice processing. He was able to do that. Well, it's going to allow him to do it using his old access, but it's going to capture in a trace exactly what is missing in the new access. And then security will be able to use that trace and go back to development, update the new role, and transport it to QA production where that can be retested. The beauty of this is that in normal testing in QA, it's try and fail. So a user tries a test script, he gets up to a point where he fails, and then he's basically got to stop that script. He captures an SU53 trace to give to security, and he sends an email to security telling them what he was doing, and a screen print of the SU53, and then security will look that over, figure out what's needed, and then get it up to production. But the tester can't continue that day usually, or at that time, he's got to go to a different test script and work on that. And maybe that's successful all the way through, maybe it's not. But after he's failed 3 to 5 times, usually A lot of times the testers give up for the day and want to go back to their day job, which is, doing real work. And so you fix whatever it is they bumped into, and you try to get them back to testing. And each time you call them back, it gets a little bit harder calling them back because they've got a job to do too. This way, you get a lot more done while you've got them engaged in testing, and they don't get frustrated. So it's really good, and it's practice. It's can capture what they're actually doing, and then if they're doing that in production, they're doing it on a new role, which is much smaller than the previous role because you eliminated all those unused transactions and all of the objects that have been associated with them. You've checked it for SOD violations, and some of the logic in building the tool, which we can tell you during our demos, is structured in such a way to not introduce new risk. They could actually do this in production if they're receiving if they're processing invoice clerks. You could give it to one user in production the first day. You've got a trace going on him, so you know exactly what he's doing, and he can do his work, and he will either complete it successfully under the old access, or he should create it under old access plus new access, but he gets his work done and gives you really good data so you can get things fixed. It makes for a much smoother go live, and tries to avoid things like I mentioned of not being able to run your payroll on day one. So that's a tool that is really, really nifty, and I think it's worth your taking a look at. But again, it's going back to the principle of reducing your testing time and improving your test results. And then the last item I put on this list was to use workflow for approvals. In AA, we put a simple workflow in there. It's not a complex thing that takes a lot of programming and configuration to use. But after you have done the initial, gotten the initial role proposal, and you have reviewed the transactions, made whatever changes you want to it, then you send it to an approver, which we call a role owner, and he can approve whether you create that role or not. They're provided with enough details to make that choice. So they are sent a pre-filled in email. They've got an area within AA to approve the role designs. They can see the transactions in the new roles. They can see the organization levels that are going to go into it. They can look at the SOD results. Is it clean of SODs, or maybe you eliminated high-risk SODs, but you left in either low or medium risk SODs. He'll be able to see that. And if he wants to, he or she, they can look at a detailed page, which will show them a security-like page, which goes down to the object level and shows them exactly what's in the role. Now, the role owners, if they're managers, they probably don't know how to use the screen, but I've worked at companies before where we had people in each area, let's say finance or in the warehouses or within sales. There'd be one person in each general area that was we call them gatekeeper or facilitator, and they knew security. That was part of their job. So they knew their security roles, and they knew how to read this stuff. And so the role owner may be getting someone to look at this with them and say, hey, yeah, this is safe, or hey, I think we ought to take this out. But all of this is done before we have our tool actually create the role. Once the role gives its approval, then the security person will generate the role. It's going to reach out to the development system, and it's going to create the role in development, and then use your normal change procedure processes, you will get the role up to QA for whatever role you need at that, whatever reviews you need at that point, and then on up to production. I've already talked a bit about how this process for testing works in production, so I won't be going into that anymore today. So that's how our tool uses these 5 principles we talked about. And how we doing on time? Finally, I'd like to look just a moment at some of the other areas where Pathlock can help you. So, and these 3 general areas, application access governance, continuous controls, and cybersecurity controls. We've got security tools that can help you with all of these. Application governance is your basically what us old timers think of as being your normal GRC processes. ARA for your SOD. Where's my mouse? SOD reports and reviews. Compliant provisioning, where you make sure a person is going to be compliant before you assign new access to them. Periodic user reviews and risk reviews. Emergency management, where you give elevated access out and trace the users while they're doing their emergency task, and then have someone review the task afterwards. And then the whole role management lifecycle, which we looked at our role creation tool. We also have role management tools that can assist there. Then we have continuous controls monitoring, such as process controls, which some of you may be familiar with. We can also monitor configuration changes, transaction monitoring, which our transaction archive tool does, license management to help you minimize your licensing cost and only buy the licenses that you really need, or give you proof so that you can negotiate with SAP for a better license deal. And then finally, down in application, excuse me, cybersecurity application controls. This is a favorite of mine because I never had access to these in the past. But when I was a consultant, we were regularly being asked for applications like this, and I'd have to refer them to other vendors. We can do dynamic data masking or data access control. So you can either mask certain fields in your data if you've got ITAR type data, or you've got personally identifiable data. You can mask specific fields, or you can mask a whole record so that a given user or person in a certain region, whatever, cannot even see it. And for as far as they know, it's not even in the system. And it does that not only at the application level, but it does it at the table level and at the download level. Really, really nifty and very approachable in ease of use. We can scan your code for any problems that may be in it. And I mean, from a security point of view, security vulnerabilities, scan it before it goes in production. Something I always wondered about, being a paranoid security person, of, could something bad accidentally or not accidentally go into a transport and enable something in production that you just don't want. Threat detection controls. I mentioned transport controls. Vulnerability controls can actually be in stuff that is in production, and data loss prevention and session logging. So we've got the whole gamut of different tools that we can help you with. And if you see something up here that looks of interest, please give our guys a call. And finally, in doing these automated controls, it really drives value for you in transparency. It lightens workload, whether you're in IT, in the business, or in audit and internal controls. And along with that comes reduced costs, because you're reducing these tasks, you can get greater productivity out of people, or as you grow, get more work done with the same amount of people and not be adding people. So huge financial incentive as well. So with that, these are just the points I went through today, and I'll take your questions now.
Thank you, Alan. Looks like we have a few questions that popped up. Our first question is, hi, AA's automated trace, can it trace on 10K users without impacting perfs?
10K being 10,000 users.
Without impacting, yeah.
Performance.
Performance.
I'm not, I would have to defer to our developer. I'm not sure if we tested it on that big, but we've used it on very large customers, and there has not been an impact. One of the things we do is we estimate how often we need to write off the traces so that the trace files don't have to be super big and don't get overwritten, among other things. So we tend to write them off when they're smaller, and we've had no issues with that to date. I would defer to our developer. We can get back to him on that question if you can log that, but we've seen no issues on that to date.
Yeah, and we'll have someone reach out to you about that to make sure that we have 100% an answer. Okay, so our other question is, this might be out of scope for the session, but when it comes to role design, what are recommendations and common traps for organizations moving to SAP, e.g. moving from something like JDE to SAP S/4HANA?
Okay, I personally cannot speak to the JDE part. We've got other people that probably can. I would say, in moving to SAP, you've got to decide on your, you have to make some big decisions on your role design. Are you going to base your task on, are you going to base your roles on individual transactions and basically task level? So what I mean by that is, in SAP, you have to attach your transactions. You attach them to security roles, also called profiles. You cannot attach them directly to the user like some systems do. So you're going to have to put them into roles. And one of your decisions that you'll go through is that you'll have to decide, am I going to put them in for a position that a bunch of people are using? And for example, I might have 100 accounts payable clerks, or I might have 300 of them accounts payable clerks who all do basically the same thing at 6 different locations. How many roles am I going to create for that? Am I going to create one role? Am I going to be very discrete in the roles, so the roles will be small and only contain a few transactions? So maybe a role has 4 or 5 transactions rather than a bunch more. Am I going to do that and have very targeted roles? And then when I have to assign security to users, am I going to have to assign him a whole bundle of those roles and decide which bundle he gets? That's called task-based security, and that's one way of doing things. And there are proponents of that because you're building very discrete roles and presumably not putting anything bad into them. The problem is that when you combine them together, the way security works in SAP, they can do bad things when you put them together because the objects between the roles can interact. So you have to check them when you assign those roles to the users to be sure that you're not attaching a risk. Another philosophy is to build a role for a position, which is the track that our tool, Authorization Architect, that's the tool, the path that we're taking right now. One day it might have the ability to do transaction-based, but it's not there right now. So I don't want to make any promises there, but it might. But the beauty of this is that, well, you can reuse them really well. If you've got a department full of people doing AP clerk work, you can associate them with your AP clerk role, find out what they're really using, and you can build the role for them. Now, I say AP clerk very loosely there. You might need more than one flavor of AP clerk because of segregation of duty risk. I know that. So you can have an AP clerk 1 who processes invoices. You may have an AP clerk type 2 that creates vendors. You have another one, well, we'll just leave it there right now, but you could have more than that. Another one that that processes the invoices. So you can break them out like that, and then even use them in different finance departments across your company using derived roles. So you can do that. This is a good way to do it. It reduces your number of roles, because I've worked at companies that have tens of thousands. If you multiply their roles out by system, it goes into the millions, but let's just say tens of thousands of roles, because they have so many derived roles, and it gets a lot to navigate through. It makes that easier. It also, you go through your SOD reviews, you do them at that department level or at that position level. So you find out that, hey, my AP clerks, I can't put everything the AP clerks need into one role because of SOD risk. Therefore, I have to break it out, and you can figure out the correct way to break it out. You do your homework up front there, and your security people will already know some of this, and your business people will already know some of this. But you do your work up front, and then when you build that role should have everything that your AP clerk needs in it. Now, we have a way to customize it to some degree so that if you got a super user in the group, he can do a few more things with it. You can add some access to Joe because he's been here forever, and he can, maybe he can run queries in production, but you don't want just anybody having that access. We can deal with that. But you're going to run your SODs up front there. And so when the time comes that you attach these positions, you should not run into any issues when you're attaching our position roles to the users. So it eliminates your work later on when you've got to figure out how to address a situation where a user needs access, but he can't have it. So you either got to not give it to him, give it to him in an emergency role, or mitigate it somehow, figure out a report you can run at the end of the month that will prove he didn't do something bad. It's much smoother than that. So a lot of installations that we work with, and our experience over the years, we like position-based roles. And then there's a third way, which uses what's called enabler roles, which is kind of a central depository of informational data. It's too much really for me to get into on a general call, but we are aware of the concept, and it's not my favorite for a number of reasons, but some of the big integrators used to push this, and they still may. I'm a security person. I think it introduces some unneeded risk into the roles, and so it kind of goes against the grain with me. But there are people that disagree with me on that, so we all have an opinion on it. But those are really three of the main ways to go about approaching security in your roles. So I hope that helps some.
Okay, great. That looks like that's the questions we have for today. And we can reach out to both of those people to give more detailed answers. We'll have a rep reach out to you. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you for coming. And if you do have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@pathlock.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. And thank you, Alan, for presenting, and we hope to see you at future webinars.